This sweet was made to catch a child's eye. Small, bright green, made of sugar and painted with arsenic. In Victorian London, that colour could come from the same family of pigments used in paint. In 1855, Arthur Hill Hassall published the results of testing more than 100 samples of coloured sugar confectionery. He reported sweets coloured with compounds of lead, copper, mercury and arsenic. Some parcels contained several colours and as many as 3 or 4 poisonous pigments. The sweet looked better because the danger had been mixed in, and this was not one deranged confectioner. Coffee could contain almost no coffee. Used tea leaves could be rebuilt and sold again. Bread could be whitened to hide poor flour. Welcome to History Was Gross, where the dirt stays in the story. Today, we are taking a Victorian shopping basket apart to find out how London faked its food, who caught the fraud, and why exposing it was much easier than stopping it. Let's start at the counter. A loaf, a packet of coffee, a scoop of tea, and a bag of sweets. Nothing looks rotten. Nothing smells like a warning. That was the advantage. The best adulteration did not make food obviously foul. It made a cheaper thing resemble a dearer one. Water became milk. Chicory became coffee. Used leaves became fresh tea. Dull flour became a white loaf. The customer saw the finished surface, while the seller controlled the mixture. Some additions were mainly a swindle. Others crossed into direct danger. Victorians knew food could be faked, but suspicion was not proof. A shopper could complain that coffee tasted weak. A grocer could blame the wholesaler. A wholesaler could blame the importer. By the time everyone had shrugged, the deed was done. Frederick Accum tried to make the fraud impossible to ignore. His 1820 book on adulterated food carried a skull, a spider's web, and a biblical warning. There is death in the pot. He described ways of detecting false ingredients and named traders who had already been convicted. It was scientific alarm-raising, with all the restraint of a man ringing a fire bell. And it worked, up to a point. A book could frighten a household, but it could not walk into thousands of shops and test what they were selling. 3 decades later, London still needed a way to turn suspicion into evidence. Arthur Hill Hassall supplied the eye. He was a physician with a microscope and a gift for noticing structures other people had dismissed as mush. Thomas Wakley supplied the weapon. He was the combative editor of the Lancet and a former MP. Together, their analytical sanitary commission bought ordinary goods from London shops, tested them, published the findings, and printed names and addresses. The last part mattered. The grocer's counter had become a crime scene with a receipt. Coffee made the method famous. A roasted coffee bean and a roasted chicory root may both end up as brown powder. To the naked eye, especially after grinding, the fraud can look perfect. Under Hassall's microscope, it fell apart. Coffee had its own cellular structure. Chicory had another. Roasted grain, beans and potato left different traces again. Grinding hid the ingredients from the buyer. Magnification gave them away. One of Hassall's published series followed 34 samples bought as coffee. Only 3 were genuine. 3 consisted almost entirely of chicory. In 1855, William Schofield repeated the result in the House of Commons and said that some of the mixtures contained no coffee at all. Think about the nerve of that. The customer asked for coffee, paid for coffee, carried home coffee, and could brew a cup in which coffee was effectively a rumour. Chicory itself was not the horror. It was, and remains, a drink ingredient. The fraud was selling a cheap substitute under the dearer name, sometimes with roasted wheat, beans or other fillers behind it. Once Hassall's reports appeared, some sellers became more careful about labels. But a label placed on a packet after a customer had clearly asked for coffee did not magically make the exchange honest. The science had answered, What is in this? The harder question was, what can anyone do about it? If you like more gross history stories like this, please like and subscribe. It makes a difference to my channel. The next item in this basket is the one Victorian families could least afford to lose. Bread was not a treat. For poorer households, it was a large part of the diet, which made every stolen ounce and every concealed defect matter. Whiter bread looked cleaner and more expensive. Alum, an aluminum-based chemical compound, could help weak or deteriorated flour produce a whiter, more saleable loaf. The baker gained a better-looking product. The customer gained no warning that appearance had been manufactured. Hassall's first London bread series contained 24 samples. He reported alum in all 24. He examined a second series of 25 and reported alum in every one again. Those are his samples, not a census of every loaf in Britain, but they explain why the white loaf became such a powerful symbol of the campaign. It did not look adulterated. It looked improved. Parliament heard broader allegations about potato, plaster of Paris, and even copper sulfate in bread. Hassall's own summary is more useful because it also tells us what he did not find. In those bread series, he reported no potato and no lime compounds. That distinction matters. Victorian investigators heard plenty of revolting claims. Hassall's value was that he could separate the thing people feared from the thing sitting in the sample. In this case, the documented trick was enough. Take poorer flour, whiten the result, and sell respectability by the loaf. Tea offered more room for invention. Genuine leaves could be used, collected, dried, darkened, and sold for another journey through the pot. Other leaves could be cut and treated to resemble tea. Colouring and glaze could turn a tired or false leaf into something that looked strong and fresh. Hassall described a manufactured substitute known as lye tea, an unusually honest name for a dishonest product. The poor buyer was particularly exposed. A wealthy household could change suppliers or pay for a better grade. A customer buying a small quantity on credit from the nearest grocer had fewer exits. Dark colour suggested strength, even when the thing producing it was not tea. The 1860 Commons debate supplied the story's filthiest cup. A speaker described a sample associated with silkworm dung sold as gunpowder tea. Members laughed, then recoiled. We should be careful with it. This was a notorious sample described in Parliament, not the standard recipe for Victorian tea. But it shows the market's ugly logic. If waste could be shaped, coloured and made to look convincing in the scoop, disgust was someone else's problem. Now return to the sweets. Hassall's confectionery chapter is not vague. It is a catalogue. Among more than 100 samples, he reported yellows made with chromates of lead. Some reds contained red lead. 6 samples used vermilion, a mercury compound. Some greens contained copper. 9 were coloured with arsenite of copper, better known as Scheele's green. 11 yellow samples used a powerful purgative pigment. These were not ingredients mistaken for food. They were colours chosen because they were bright. One named London sample of pink and yellow comfits contained chromate of lead in the yellow coating. Another yellow parcel contained it in what Hassall called a rather large amount. Some cake ornaments were painted using white lead. In a few parcels, several colours brought several poisons together. Victorian sweets could be adulterated underneath the colour, too. Hassall found flour and hydrated sulfate of lime replacing part of the sugar. One comfit gave a sweet first taste, then left what he called a hard and tasteless centre of flour around the seed. Even the harmless fraud had layers. With the sweets, the swindle turns nastier. Fake coffee steals money. A poisonous pigment can attack the body. Hassall did not know the dose eaten by every customer, and we should not invent victims he did not record. The chemistry is ugly enough without decoration. Lead, mercury, copper and arsenic compounds had no business being painted onto sweets. The bright colour was the evidence. And Hassall printed where he bought them. Broad Street, Tottenham Court Road, Bishopsgate, Oxford Street, Commercial Road, Whitechapel. The addresses are what make the pages bite. These were not monsters in a fairy tale. They were ordinary purchases from real London counters in real London streets. Wakley and Hassall had built a brutal machine for publicity. Buy the sample, test the sample, name the seller, print the address. The reports made denial harder and dragged adulteration into Parliament. In 1855, a select committee was appointed. In 1860, Parliament finally passed an Adulteration of Food or Drink Act. It sounded like the answer. In practice, it gave campaigners something to grip and not much leverage. Local authorities could appoint analysts, but the Act did not create a strong official sampling system. The buyer often had to begin the complaint. Cases could turn on proving that a seller knew an ingredient was there and knew it was harmful. Parliament had already spotted the trap during the debate. Under the microscope, the coffee mixture revealed what the naked eye could not. The burden still sat heavily on the customer, least able to carry it. A poor buyer was expected to challenge the local trader, find analysis and risk the cost and trouble. Exposure had changed the conversation. It had not yet made inspection routine. The next steps were less theatrical and more useful. The 1872 Act strengthened sampling and the principle that food should match the nature, substance or quality demanded by the buyer. In 1874, analysts formed their own professional society and chose Hassall as its first president. They argued over methods because a result that could punish a trader had to survive more than a newspaper headline. Then came the Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875. It required the relevant authorities to appoint analysts, provided machinery for official samples, and allowed disputed results to reach a referee analyst. The law still had gaps. Enforcement still depended on local people doing their jobs. Food fraud carried on after 1875. What changed was the comfortable assumption that a customer would never be able to prove it. The microscope did not make London honest. It made a hidden bargain visible. Coffee had structure, tea leaves had structure, flour, chicory, starch and pigment left evidence. Hassall's real achievement was not discovering that shopkeepers could cheat. Everyone knew that. He showed how to make the contents answer back. Put the green sweet back on its paper. It is still bright and still tempting. Now, though, it has a shop address and a sample number. An analyst can test it. A law can act on the result. London kept faking food after 1875. Pretending the fraud was invisible had become a much harder trick. Which would make you angriest? Coffee with no coffee in it, whitened bread that could make you sick, rebuilt tea from old leaves, or poisons used simply to make a sweet look prettier.